Yesterday, the Supreme Court struck down Trump's tariffs. Canada walked free. Today, Donald Trump went all in. This morning, he posted on Truth Social that he is immediately raising the global tariff from 10% to 15%. 15%, the maximum allowed under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. The absolute ceiling. He hit it on day one, without hesitation. And Canada, remarkably, remains exempt. To understand what is happening here, we need to break down exactly what has unfolded over the past 24 hours. We need to look at what it means for Canada, what it signals about Trump's strategy, and why this story is far from over. First, a quick recap. On Friday, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that Trump's IEPA tariffs were unconstitutional. That decision struck a massive blow to his most powerful unilateral trade tool. The IEPA allowed him to impose tariffs of any size on any country for any reason he deemed an emergency, with no expiration. In effect, it was an unlimited weapon, and the Supreme Court just took it away. Trump's response was immediate. Almost as soon as the ruling was announced, he unveiled a new 10% global tariff under Section 122, a completely different legal authority. In his announcement, he confirmed that CUSMA-compliant goods from Canada and Mexico would remain exempt. That exemption was important. It meant that the vast majority of Canadian exports, those that meet trade rules under CUSMA, were still safe from tariffs. But 10% was apparently not enough. Less than 24 hours later, Trump posted on Truth Social, "I am raising the global tariff to 15% effective immediately." 15%, the legal maximum allowed under Section 122. He did not wait. He did not consult Congress. He went straight to the ceiling. Here is what you need to understand about Section 122. It is fundamentally different from the IEPA. Under the IEPA, Trump could impose unlimited tariffs on any country, at any rate, for an indefinite period, simply by declaring a national emergency. Section 122 is much more constrained. The maximum tariff rate is 15%. It expires after 150 days unless Congress extends it, and it must apply equally to all countries. No country can be singled out. Trump just hit all three limits at once. 15% applies globally. It cannot last more than 150 days, and it is non-discriminatory. That expiration date places the tariff's effective end around July 21, 2026, right in the middle of the CUSMA review. That timing is not an accident. It is deliberate. It is a pressure tactic. So, what does this 15% global tariff actually mean for Canada? Officially, according to the White House, the CUSMA exemption remains in place. CUSMA-compliant goods from Canada are not subject to the Section 122 tariff. That is significant. According to RBC Economics, approximately 89% of Canadian exports to the United States qualify under CUSMA. In other words, the vast majority of Canadian trade with the U.S. remains unaffected. But here is the complication. CIBC chief economist Avery Schenfeld immediately flagged an open question. Does the new 15% tariff stack on top of existing Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, and autos? Those tariffs were imposed during Trump's previous term and remain in place. They were not affected by the Supreme Court ruling and are not explicitly covered by the CUSMA exemption. If the new 15% tariff were applied on top of Section 232 tariffs, Canadian producers in those sectors, steel, aluminum, auto manufacturing, lumber, could actually be worse off than they were before the Supreme Court ruling. It is not spin. This is what professional economists are pointing out. The legal and trade mechanics are still being worked through. Canada's trade teams are analyzing the proclamation, and it will take several days to fully understand the implications. What is clear is that Trump's strategy is aggressive, deliberate, and immediate. Losing the IEPA did not slow him down. He found a replacement tool and maxed it out on day one. That is his approach. When one weapon is taken away, find three more. And here, he has demonstrated that with Section 122, 15%, global, maximum rate, immediate effect. Trump's own statement underscores this strategy. He wrote, and I quote, "The court has given me the unquestioned right to ban all sorts of things from coming into our country to destroy foreign countries, a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we even had, but not the right to charge a fee." Notice what he is doing here. He is framing a legal loss as a strategic victory. The Supreme Court told him he could not impose tariffs under the IEPA. He interprets that as permission to use every other tool available. He claims an expansive power to economically destroy foreign countries. That is the playbook. When one legal avenue closes, find another. When one tool is constrained, maximize every other. And in doing so, Trump is signaling both to Canada and to the world that he is still willing to push trade aggressively. Here is where Canada's story becomes particularly important. While Canada remains exempt from the new Section 122 tariff, Trump has already announced that his trade representative is launching new investigations under Section 301. Section 301 was the authority used in his first term to impose tariffs on China. It allows for investigations into unfair trading practices and can lead to targeted tariffs with no ceiling and no expiration. Unlike Section 122, Section 301 does not require equality across countries. It can be directed at specific sectors. Trump's team has already flagged potential Canadian targets: dairy protections, digital services taxes that Carney paused, provincial policies that restrict certain American products. These investigations take time, but they signal that Canada's exemption today may not protect it tomorrow. The pressure is shifting from a broad, indiscriminate tariff to targeted investigations that could hit specific sectors at rates Trump chooses. Carney and other Canadian officials understood this. His response to the Supreme Court ruling was measured, not triumphant. He called it a step in the right direction, but emphasized that the fight is far from over. Doug Ford, Canada's Prime Minister, and other officials echoed the same sentiment. Economists, analysts, and trade experts agree the tariff war has not ended. It has merely changed shape. Zooming out, this week has been extraordinary for Canada. On Tuesday, Carney announced a $6.6 billion defense industrial strategy, reducing Canada's reliance on American military supply chains. On Wednesday, he confirmed that Canada is leading negotiations for a 40-nation trade alliance linking the European Union and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. On Friday, the Supreme Court struck down Trump's primary tariff weapon. On Saturday, Trump maxed out his replacement weapon under Section 122. Every single one of these developments points in the same strategic direction. Canada is reducing its dependence on the United States. The 40-nation alliance provides alternative markets. The defense industrial strategy reduces dependence on American weapons. The Supreme Court ruling removes Trump's most powerful unilateral tariff tool. And the exemption under Section 122 confirms that Canada's strongest protection remains its trade agreements and domestic policy framework. The real battlefield will be the CUSMA review in July. That is where Trump's strategy and Canada's defensive positioning intersect. By maxing out Section 122 at 15% with an expiration date coinciding with the CUSMA review, Trump is signaling, "I still have leverage. Negotiate quickly." Carney's strategy, by contrast, is patience and positioning. Build alliances, diversify trade, strengthen domestic industries, and make the U.S. less essential as a trading partner. In effect, it is patience versus pressure, and so far, patience is winning. Even as Trump's new Section 122 tariff takes effect, Canada remains largely shielded. CUSMA-compliant goods, 89% of exports, remain exempt. Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, copper, and autos remain a separate matter under review. Section 301 investigations could target sectors in the future, but they require a formal investigation process. That process takes months, during which Canada will have strengthened its position in alternative markets and continued its domestic strategic development. Let us be absolutely clear about what is happening here. Donald Trump went to the absolute legal maximum the moment he was able to under Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. 15%. Effective immediately. Applied globally. That is the ceiling, the highest rate the law allows, and he did not hesitate to hit it. Yet, despite the fanfare and the headlines, Canada is largely unaffected. Canada is walking free. That is not a coincidence. It is the result of deliberate, long-term planning, strategic preparation, and a careful approach to trade and international relations that has paid off precisely at the moment when Trump unleashed his maximum tariff weapon. Canada's position demonstrates the power and importance of measured, patient strategy in global trade. Over recent years, Canada has invested heavily in building alternative markets, reducing its reliance on the United States as a single dominant trading partner. Through the negotiation of new trade partnerships, both bilaterally and with multilateral alliances, Canadian exporters have options beyond the U.S. market. At the same time, the country has strengthened its domestic industries, manufacturing, technology, energy, and defense sectors, so that its economy is less vulnerable to sudden external shocks. By diversifying its trade portfolio and focusing on long-term industrial growth, Canada has effectively created a buffer against unilateral economic actions from the United States. The exemption from Trump's new 15% global tariff is not just a legal technicality. It is a reflection of Canada's success in positioning itself as a resilient and independent economic actor. While the announcement of the tariff grabs headlines and dominates the news cycle, the underlying story is far more important. It is a story about leverage, dependence, and the shift in negotiating power. Canada no longer has to assume automatic compliance from the United States. The days when American trade policy alone dictated outcomes for Canadian exporters are waning. Instead, Canada now approaches the table from a position of strength, with alternatives, protections, and alliances that make it far more resistant to economic coercion. The lesson is clear for global observers. Legal limitations, diversification, and alliances can neutralize unilateral pressure. Trump has shown the playbook. When one tool is removed, escalate with another. But Canada has responded by reducing the impact of escalation before it happens. The maximum tariff, the exemption, the pending investigations all exist within a context of calculated Canadian resilience. This is not just theory. It is visible in every recent Canadian policy decision. The $6.6 billion defense industrial strategy ensures Canada can maintain security and defense independence. The 40-nation trade alliance positions Canada to access growing markets in Europe and Asia, reducing reliance on the U.S. The Supreme Court ruling neutralized the most dangerous tool, and the Section 122 exemption ensures immediate protection. By July, the real negotiations begin, but by then, Canada will be stronger, less dependent, and more strategically positioned than it is today. What does this mean for Trump's strategy? Section 122 expires after 150 days. Section 301 requires months of investigation. His window for immediate leverage is shrinking. Canada's alternative markets and strengthened domestic industries mean that by the time new tools could be applied, the impact will be diluted. In other words, the pressure Trump is attempting to exert will have less effect. His signals are loud, his tariffs maximum, but his influence on outcomes is already constrained. The strategic lesson for Canada is equally profound. Dependence creates vulnerability. Diversification creates resilience. Patience pays. By investing in alliances, domestic production, and alternative markets, Canada has built buffers that blunt immediate threats and create leverage over the long term. In short, here is the bottom line. Trump went to the maximum the moment he legally could. 15% worldwide, effective immediately. Section 122 is capped, expires in July, and Canada remains largely exempt. Section 301 may present future risks, but it will take time. Canada is building alternatives, alliances, and domestic capacity. Patience, preparation, and strategy are winning over pressure, threats, and unilateral action. This is what building looks like. This is what patience looks like. This is what winning looks like in the complex world of international trade. Trump's actions make headlines. Canada's strategy builds long-term security. And the difference between the two is more than legal. It is strategic, structural, and enduring. Canada is walking free, and it is doing so by design, not luck. The story is far from over, but the trajectory is clear. Patience versus pressure, and so far, patience is winning.